6 coups, 1 continent, 1 collapsing order. From Mali to Niger, from Guinea to Burkina Faso, West Africa has become a battlefield of legitimacy. But Guinea-Bissau, that was the final straw. On November 25th, the country didn't just switch presidents, it switched allegiances. The army took control, but didn't call it war. They called it reconciliation. They formed a new council but closed the borders. They promised dialogue but suspended the constitution. And ECOWAS, they suspended Guinea-Bissau. But this time no one begged to be let back in because this wasn't just a coup. It was a rejection of a system that failed, of an architecture that cracked. Guinea-Bissau didn't burn the house. It just walked out and left the door wide open. If you think this isn't the end, but the beginning, hit that like button. On that November morning, President Umaro Sissoco Embalo was arrested by his own presidential guard. Within 48 hours, General Zorda Intero was sworn in as transitional head of state. The military suspended the constitution, closed the borders, and announced a national council for reconciliation. The language was soft. Stability, dialogue, restoring order. But the actions were hard. ECOWAS reacted swiftly, suspending Guinea-Bissau's membership and calling the coup an illegal abortion of democracy. And yet, Guinea-Bissau didn't respond. No press appeal, no request for reinstatement, just silence. And from that silence, a louder truth emerged. Before the soldiers marched, the rot had already spread. Guinea-Bissau wasn't toppled by tanks. It was eroded from within, by silence, by deals made behind closed doors, by the quiet corruption of trust. For decades, this small country was treated like an afterthought, a drug transit zone, a failed experiment in nation-building, a cautionary tale on every think tank shelf. But the people lived through it and they knew better. Behind the facade of democracy, power rotated between cliques. The presidency became a prize, not a responsibility. President Embalo came to power promising reform, but reform turned to control. His critics claimed he weakened the courts, threatened opponents, and sought to extend his rule beyond legal limits. He accused Parliament of obstruction. Parliament accused him of authoritarian drift. Deadlock followed dysfunction. And into that vacuum walked something far more dangerous, the drug trade. By the time ECOWAS issued its last statement, Guinea-Bissau was already a narco-state. Not metaphorically, literally. The United Nations named it a cocaine hub. South American cartels flew shipments directly to its shores. Coast guards looked the other way. Some didn't even show up. Drug barons didn't hide. They ran businesses, funded campaigns, and dined with generals. In a country of just 2 million, loyalty is cheap and silence cheaper. The lines between state, military, and cartel blurred. And every time ECOWAS looked, it saw only what it wanted. Elections held, constitutions printed, flags flying. But the people, they saw their sons disappear into the drug routes. They saw politicians fly to Paris while hospitals lacked syringes. They saw soldiers guarding luxury cars while schools crumbled. They stopped trusting ballots. They stopped trusting speeches. And slowly, they started listening to someone else, the military. Because in a system where the courts are paralyzed, the economy is underground, and the political class is bought, only one force still holds weapons and commands fear. The army didn't seize power because it wanted to. It seized power because it could, and because no one else was left standing. If you think this wasn't random but scripted, tell me in the comments. But this wasn't just about dysfunction. This was about rejection. The military statements didn't attack ECOWAS. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder. They made no effort to stay, no request to return, no appeal to regional order, because to them, ECOWAS was part of the problem. The people of Guinea-Bissau watched as ECOWAS turned a blind eye to stolen elections, to foreign control of ports, to rising cartel power. When Embalo sought to centralize power, ECOWAS called for dialogue. When the opposition cried foul, ECOWAS praised stability. And when people begged for sovereignty, ECOWAS delivered silence. So the military delivered its own verdict, not through a speech, through a step, away from ECOWAS, away from the illusion of order. And the message was simple. If we are going to be ruled, let it at least be by our own. Every coup has a cast, not just soldiers, but sponsors, spectators, and silent beneficiaries. Guinea-Bissau was no exception. At the front of the stage stood the army. But behind the curtain, a tangled web of generals, smugglers, investors, and ghosts of empire. The generals in Guinea-Bissau's military have always been more than a defense force. They are political brokers, business partners, gatekeepers to contracts. In a fragile state, the man with a gun often writes the law. But over the past decade, many of those guns were greased with money from elsewhere, especially from the cocaine routes. According to United Nations reports, high-ranking officers were not just turning a blind eye. They were facilitating logistics, protecting shipments, and laundering proceeds through construction deals and land sales. That money fed the system. It paid for loyalty, silenced dissent, and created an invisible economy stronger than the official one. It blurred lines between military, government, and mafia. And once blurred, those lines don't return. But the deeper network stretched beyond the borders. Guinea-Bissau became a chessboard, and foreign powers picked their pieces. China entered quietly, but decisively. In 2022, Beijing signed a $140 million deal to modernize the fishing sector and rebuild port infrastructure. On paper, it was development aid. In reality, it was leverage. Chinese state companies gained access to key trade routes, exclusive fishing zones, and customs privileges. And in a country where 80% of the population depends on fishing, that's not just economy, that's control. Chinese engineers built docks, but they didn't train locals. They brought in their own labor. Local unions protested. They were ignored. When journalists asked who negotiated the contracts, the answers vanished. Beijing didn't stage the coup. But it doesn't have to, because a stable, independent Guinea-Bissau is harder to control than one in flux, desperate for funds, and silent on conditions. Then there's France, the ghost that never left. Although Guinea-Bissau was a Portuguese colony, Paris maintained economic reach through regional banks, telecom stakes, and military ties with ECOWAS countries. France has always played the long game in West Africa, shaped the institutions, then ruled through them. And Portugal, the former colonizer, returned, not with ships, but with loans and soft diplomacy. Lisbon courted Embalo. He visited regularly, praised Portuguese language integration, and offered infrastructure concessions to Lusophone firms. In effect, 3 external players stood over Guinea-Bissau's future. Each had something to protect. Each had something to lose. So when the military took over and framed it not as conquest, but as reconciliation, the silence from these capitals wasn't confusion. It was calculation. They were watching, not protesting. Because the truth is, instability is profitable when you're not the one living in it. And where was ECOWAS in this web? At best, a bystander. At worst, a gatekeeper to foreign influence. ECOWAS was designed to protect West Africa from foreign domination. But somewhere along the way, it became the velvet glove of soft neo-colonialism. It enforced elections, but didn't check who financed them. It condemned coups but stayed silent when foreign firms swallowed ports, oil, and land. It spoke of democracy while its most vocal members signed weapons deals with Europe and telecom contracts with China. To Guinea-Bissau's generals, ECOWAS was no longer a neutral referee. It was an extension of the same external pressures they were trying to break free from. They didn't fear condemnation. They expected it. But what they feared more was returning to a table where their own sovereignty came with strings attached. And maybe that's why the coup was so quiet. Not because it lacked ambition, but because it had a plan. One that wasn't written in Bissau or Brussels, but somewhere in between. What happened in Guinea-Bissau didn't start in Bissau. It started in Bamako, in Ouagadougou, in Niamey. Since 2020, West Africa has been unraveling one coup, one crisis, one silent exit at a time. Mali was first. Fed up with corruption, foreign military presence, and failed security missions, its officers swept in. Then came Guinea. then Burkina Faso, then Niger, now Guinea-Bissau. 5 countries, 6 coups, one message: we're done being managed. ECOWAS, once hailed as the guardian of regional democracy, now looks like a house with missing walls. Every time it condemns a coup, another capital shrugs and walks away. Every threat of sanctions is met with sovereign defiance. What observers are witnessing isn't chaos, it's rupture. Not just from leaders, but from the idea that ECOWAS still commands moral authority. And the cracks are widening. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger formed the Alliance of Sahel States, they weren't just pooling military resources. They were declaring political adulthood, a new bloc, a new doctrine. No more waiting for ECOWAS's green lights. No more policy written in Abuja, endorsed in Paris, and rubber-stamped in Accra. Instead, African problems, African solutions, but not the ones ECOWAS was built to deliver. Because at its core, ECOWAS is trapped in a contradiction. It speaks the language of unity, but enforces the will of a select few. It calls for democratic values, but turns a blind eye to elections rigged with foreign money. It promotes integration but blocks regional autonomy when it challenges French, EU, or World Bank interests. If you ever believed ECOWAS could stop what's coming, maybe it's time to think again. In Guinea-Bissau, there was no formal withdrawal, no declaration of secession, but the silence after suspension says everything. They didn't fight to stay because there's nothing left to stay for. The economic incentives ECOWAS once offered, preferential trade, regional funding, diplomatic cover, now come with political strings most militaries won't accept. The credibility it once held as a regional referee is now diluted by its uneven responses and foreign entanglements. And the people? They no longer chant for ECOWAS to intervene. They chant for ECOWAS to leave. Across the region, flags once waved in solidarity now signal defiance. In Mali, they burn French symbols. In Niger, they shout, "Long live sovereignty." In Burkina Faso, school children learn about Thomas Sankara, not Brussels. A generational shift is underway, not toward extremism, not toward isolation, but toward a brutal, self-defined sovereignty that refuses supervision. Of course, it comes with risks. Yes, some of these regimes may falter. And yes, transitions may be messy, imperfect, or even regressive. But for many West Africans, that risk is now preferable to the certainty of being ruled by committees, donors, and diplomats with second passports. Guinea-Bissau understood the moment. They saw the pattern. They joined the rhythm. And in doing so, they made it harder for ECOWAS to pretend the old system still holds. Because it doesn't. Not when nearly 1/3 of its member states have defied its authority. Not when its condemnations are ignored. Not when its interventions come too late, or not at all. And not when the people on the ground no longer see it as theirs. This is the new map of West Africa, not drawn by borders, but by breaks. And in every break, there's a question. Are they falling apart or finally breaking free? What if this wasn't a rebellion? What if it was the final act of a long-delayed realignment? Look again. No blood in the streets, no chaotic factions, no frantic appeals to the West, only method, order, timing. This wasn't the collapse of ECOWAS. It was the quiet burial of something that had already died. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was orchestrated by those who once built it. The idea of ECOWAS was born in the 1970s, a regional dream of African integration, trade, peacekeeping. But over time, that vision became entangled with foreign finance, donor conditionalities, and security dependencies. What started as unity became utility, especially for those outside Africa. And when that utility ran dry, so did the support. When ECOWAS could no longer guarantee influence, its sponsors stopped investing in legitimacy. Instead, they hedged with new alignments, with bilateral ties, with direct deals to generals, to states, to factions. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, those shifts happened through visible defiance. But Guinea-Bissau was different. It didn't shout, it adapted. No anti-French protests, no Russian flags, no new slogans, just silence and a reset. And maybe that's what makes it more dangerous. Because when a state quietly exits the system without fanfare, it suggests the rules no longer matter. And when no one rushes to stop it, it suggests the system has no defenders left. Some analysts believe Guinea-Bissau's military was coached, that their transition language, dialogue, stability, inclusive process was designed not to provoke condemnation but to slip through unnoticed. And maybe it worked, because while media focused on wars elsewhere, this small nation quietly stepped into the void, not alone, not chaotic, but precise, surgical, like the last piece placed on a chessboard before the whole game flips. If so, the question isn't who's behind the coup, it's who benefits from the new map. And the answer isn't always foreign. Sometimes the hand that breaks the system is the one that once believed in it, until it realized the system wasn't broken, it was working, just not for us. No anthem played, no declaration made. Just a silent goodbye to a system that no longer served. Guinea-Bissau didn't explode. It evaporated from ECOWAS, from the old promises, from the illusion of regional guardianship. And in its place, a quiet defiance, a dangerous freedom, an uncharted road. But maybe, just maybe, that's what sovereignty looks like. If you refuse to let this truth be buried, like, comment, and subscribe. Not for me, for every voice that's never been heard.